Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we are going deep on a growth story that is happening on the XRP ledger right now, and that almost nobody in the broader crypto community is tracking correctly. 2,200%. That is the growth rate of tokenized real-world assets on the XRP ledger over the last 13 months. Not 200%, not 500%, 2,200%. And here is what makes that number even more significant than it appears on the surface. The total value of tokenized real-world assets on the XRP ledger has now reached $3.53 billion, a new all-time high, with 50% of that growth happening in the last 30 days alone. I want you to stay with me through this entire breakdown, because at the 7-minute mark, I am going to show you exactly which institutions are driving this growth, why the XRP ledger specifically is capturing institutional tokenization at this pace, and why the intersection of $3.53 billion in tokenized assets, CME futures that launched today, and the Clarity Act's August 10th deadline creates a picture that most retail participants are not seeing yet. But first, let us establish what real-world asset tokenization actually is. Because the community uses the term constantly, but most people do not understand the mechanism that makes it significant for XRP. Real-world asset tokenization is the process of creating a digital representation of a physical or financial asset on a blockchain. A tokenized US Treasury bond, a tokenized real estate fund, a tokenized commodity contract, a tokenized corporate credit instrument. Each of these represents a real-world asset that has been moved onto blockchain rails where it can be transferred, used as collateral, settled instantly, and accessed by institutional participants globally without the friction of traditional clearing infrastructure. The tokenization market is projected to reach $31 trillion by 2030. That is not a crypto community projection. That is a projection from McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and major institutional research houses that have analyzed the cost savings and efficiency gains that tokenization delivers versus traditional asset management infrastructure. And the XRP ledger is currently ranked among the top 4 or 5 chains globally for total tokenized real-world asset value. Now let us talk about what drove the 2,200% growth over 13 months, because the headline number requires context to understand its significance. The XRP ledger was purpose-built for institutional asset transfer. Its native decentralized exchange, its atomic swap capability, its 3 to 5 second settlement finality, its CFTC-regulated commodity status, and its permission domain and credentials infrastructure make it uniquely suited for the compliance requirements that institutional tokenization demands. In February of 2026, the Permission DEX amendment activated on the XRP ledger mainnet, creating gated and members-only DEX instances alongside the public DEX. Only accounts meeting specific credential requirements can place or accept offers in permissioned pools. This gives institutional participants the compliance controls they require to trade tokenized assets in regulated environments without exposing their order books publicly. This infrastructure upgrade is what opened the door for institutional tokenization volume to accelerate at the pace the data is showing. And the institutions that walk through that door include names that should stop every serious XRP holder in their tracks. BlackRock has adopted RLUSD as institutional collateral. Mastercard and WebBank are using XRPL for credit card settlement pilots. LMAX has established prime brokerage infrastructure on the XRP ledger. Archax, the institutional digital securities exchange, is targeting over $1 billion in tokenized assets on XRPL by mid-2026. These are not startups experimenting with blockchain. These are established institutional players making formal infrastructure commitments to the XRP ledger as their tokenization and settlement layer. Now let us talk about the RLUSD dimension, because it connects the tokenization story directly to XRP demand in a way that most people are not calculating. OKX integrated RLUSD across 280 plus trading pairs on April 29th of 2026. OKX is one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world. Its decision to list RLUSD against 280 plus pairs means that RLUSD now has access to one of the deepest liquidity pools in global crypto markets. Gemini has embedded RLUSD in a $250 million credit facility structure with 7% interest in RLUSD collateral requirements. Disclosed in Gemini's SEC filings, this is not a marketing partnership. This is RLUSD embedded in the formal capital structure of a regulated US crypto exchange. exchange. And Jack McDonald, Ripple's SVP of stablecoins, has confirmed explicitly that every single XRPL activity involving RLUSD requires the native XRP asset. Transaction fees, ledger operations, large transfers, all of it runs on XRP without exception. That means every dollar of tokenized real-world asset activity on the XRP ledger, every RLUSD transaction on OKX, every Gemini credit facility operation that touches XRPL generates mandatory non-discretionary XRP demand. $3.53 billion of tokenized real-world assets, generating transaction activity on a ledger where every transaction requires XRP. That is not speculative demand. That is operational demand that scales automatically as tokenization volume grows. Now let us talk about the 50% growth in 30 days specifically, because this is the acceleration signal that changes the math. $3.53 billion total, with 50% of that growth happening in the last 30 days. That means approximately $1.75 billion of new tokenized real-world asset value was added to the XRP ledger in a single month. $1.75 billion in 30 days, at a pace that, if sustained, would add over $20 billion in tokenized assets to the XRP ledger in the next 12 months. And this acceleration is happening simultaneously with the Clarity Act advancing toward the full Senate floor, with CME Group XRP futures launching today, with $19 million in first-day notional volume, with XRP spot ETFs holding $1.39 billion in cumulative inflows, and with exchange reserves compressed by 56% since October 2025. Each of these developments individually represents institutional conviction. Together, they represent a convergence of demand drivers arriving into a supply picture that has been systematically compressed. Now, let us connect the tokenization growth to the Standard Chartered and Galaxy Digital price math. Standard Chartered's Jeffrey Kendrick built his price targets on two assumptions: ETF inflows of $4 to $8 billion post-Clarity Act enactment, and confirmed regulatory clarity. Galaxy Digital's framework shows 1% of SWIFT's $5 trillion daily payment volume, justifying $4 to $5 structurally. But neither of these models fully captures the compounding effect of $3.53 billion of tokenized real-world assets, generating mandatory XRP transaction demand on the XRP ledger. Every tokenized treasury bond that settles on XRPL, every RLUSD credit facility operation that touches the ledger, every OKX trade across 280 plus RLUSD pairs generates XRP demand that the ETF flow models and Swift capture models were not built to capture. The Standard Chartered base case of $2.80 by end of 2026 is built on visible assumptions. The tokenization demand that $3.53 billion of on-chain real-world assets generates is additive to those assumptions, not included in them. Now let us talk about what the CME futures launch today adds to this picture. CME Group XRP futures went live this morning with $19 million in notional first-day volume, beating Solana's CME debut of $12.3 million. The same institutional participants who access CME futures for hedging and exposure are the same institutional participants who are driving the tokenization volume on the XRP ledger. CME futures, spot ETFs, tokenized real-world assets, RLUSD adoption, permissioned institutional DeFi. These are not separate stories. They are different entry points for the same institutional capital into the same ecosystem. Now I want to address something directly, because this community deserves a rational voice on what the tokenization numbers mean and what they do not mean. $3.53 billion of tokenized real-world assets is a significant number, but it is early stage relative to the $31 trillion addressable market that McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group project by 2030. David Schwartz has been consistent about this. The bull case for XRP is built on visible adoption data and measurable institutional commitment, not on projections that assume the total addressable market is already captured. The rational framework is this: 2,200% growth in 13 months, 50% acceleration in the last 30 days. BlackRock, Mastercard, LMAX, Archax, OKX, and Gemini, all making formal infrastructure commitments to XRPL. CME futures live today. Spot ETFs at 1.39 billion cumulative. Clarity Act advancing toward August 10th. That is the visible evidence base. The $31 trillion projection is the addressable opportunity. The gap between those two numbers is where the price discovery happens. Now I want to talk about what most people in this community are getting wrong right now. XRP is trading near $1.38 to $1.43. 2,200% RWA growth just hit a new all-time high of 3.53 billion. CME futures launched today. BlackRock is using RLUSD as collateral. OKX has 280 plus RLUSD pairs. And the retail market is watching a sideways price chart, wondering when something is going to happen. Something is already happening. The institutions building the tokenization infrastructure on the XRP ledger are not waiting for the price to validate their thesis before committing capital. They committed the capital and built the infrastructure because they already validated the thesis internally. The retail market waits for the signal. The institutions are already $3.53 billion deep into the infrastructure. So let us zoom out and see the complete picture assembling right now. Tokenized real-world assets on XRPL at $3.53 billion, new all-time high. 2,200% growth in 13 months. 50% growth in 30 days. BlackRock RLUSD collateral. Mastercard XRPL credit card settlement. LMAX prime brokerage on XRPL. Archax targeting 1 billion plus by mid-2026. OKX 280 plus RLUSD pairs. Gemini 250 million RLUSD credit facility. Jack McDonald confirmed XRP non-optional for every RLUSD XRPL transaction. Permission DEX live for institutional compliant trading. CME XRP futures live today with $19 million debut. Spot ETF cumulative inflows 1.39 billion. Exchange reserves down 56% since October 2025. Whale wallets 68.5% of circulating supply. Clarity Act advancing toward August 10th Senate recess deadline. The 2,200% growth rate is not a projection. It is already on the ledger. If this analysis changed how you are thinking about what the tokenization explosion on XRPL actually means for XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the move.